She didn't ask. She screamed. Deep in the heart of a glowing alien jungle, where even the shadows breathe and the vines pulse like veins, she stood pregnant, furious, divine. Her finger pointed straight at him like fate itself had chosen its mark. "You'll be the father," she roared. "This bloodline must live and it chose you." He froze, muscles tight, eyes wide. The breath ripped from his lungs not by the sound, but by what he felt. Her womb was glowing, pulsing, in sync with his heartbeat. Something was alive in her, and somehow it already knew him. And in that moment, Marcus realized he hadn't just stumbled into her world. He was already part of it. The jungle pulsed with an eerie golden light, casting long shadows between the towering ferns and bioluminescent vines that dripped like liquid fire from the canopy above. The air shimmered with humidity and something else, something ancient. And then, it shattered. Her voice tore through the silence like a blade. "You'll be the father," she screamed, eyes blazing like molten amber. "This bloodline must live, and it chose you." Marcus froze, half-stepped back. His breath caught in his chest. His bare feet sank into the damp moss as he struggled to comprehend the creaturino, the queen standing before him. Shala, tall, regal, terrifyingly beautiful. Her emerald green skin glowed faintly in the jungle light, and her swollen belly pulsed with a soft, bioluminescent rhythm, slow, steady, and unmistakably in sync with his heartbeat. He didn't want to believe it, but the evidence stared back at him with every pulse, every breath. This isn't possible," he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. Shala stepped forward. Her movements were fluid, inhumanly graceful. Silver tendrils, like living hair, swayed gently from her scalp, as if responding to the energy in the air. "You gave me life," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "Even when you didn't know." A deep hum trembled through the jungle floor. The vines twisted overhead like they were listening, watching. Marcus's gaze locked onto her glowing abdomen light, flickering under the skin in intricate fractal patterns that looked disturbingly like DNA sequencing. His DNA, as if nature itself had etched his genetic code into her womb. And for a heartbeat, he wasn't just standing in a jungle anymore. He was standing at the edge of something primordial. A decision he didn't remember making had already been made for him. And the life growing inside her, whatever it was, knew his name before he ever knew hers. The descent was silent, save for the soft hum of living stone. The tunnel around them pulsed faintly, walls not carved, but grown. Veins of light slithered beneath the surface like currents of slow fire, shifting in response to their presence. The air changed the deeper they went. Cooler, thicker, tinged with something almost electric, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Shala walked ahead, bare feet gliding over the bioluminescent path. The glow followed her like a memory rekindled. Then, without warning, the passage opened into a vast chamber, so immense that its ceiling vanished into darkness. And there it stood, Xibalba. A city not built but born. Towers of crystalline bone spiraled upward like frozen lightning. Bridges wove between them, suspended in midair without any visible support, vibrating with the soft hum of alien resonance. Structures breathed with quiet intention, their surfaces rippling like water beneath starlight. Nothing was static. Everything lived. Marcus stepped forward, drawn into the impossible beauty, but the awe faded the moment he saw them. Encased in transparent chambers along the perimeter of the throne hall were dozens of capsules. Each one held something once meant to be alive. Figurine humanoid, twisted curled in states of suspended failure, some with elongated limbs, others with reptilian scales fused to incomplete human faces. Eyes that never opened, mouths that never cried. Silent, eternal echoes of ambition gone wrong. Shala's voice broke through the weight of the silence. "We tried without love, without choice, without respect. That's why they failed." Her words didn't carry sorrow. They carried truth. Marcus moved slowly, his breath shallow. Each step brought him closer to a large circular pod in the center. Unlike the others, this one was empty, clean, waiting. As he approached, the pod responded. A subtle glow blossomed beneath the surface. It wasn't random. The pattern sharp, organic, and precise mirrored the double helix structure of human DNA. His DNA. He reached out, instinctively. The glow intensified. Not harsh, but warm, recognizing him. It wasn't just a container, it was an invitation. This chamber wasn't just a hall of remembrance. It was a womb of destiny. The failed were mourned, yes, but the future had already begun to take shape, and it was staring directly at him. A faint tremor rolled through the floor as the air grew heavier, not with threat, but with presence. From the shadows, he emerged. Tesca, taller than Marcus, broader, scaled in deep obsidian hues that shimmered like wet stone beneath the chamber's pale light. His eyes were cold, intelligent, predatory, without being violent. Regal, but not kind. He didn't bow. He didn't need to. He is just a man, Tesca said, his voice calm, but laced with ancient disapproval. He doesn't understand what it means to be chosen by the womb of the queen. The silence that followed was taut, like a blade hovering between them. Shala didn't flinch. She stepped forward, placing herself between them, not out of fear, but out of decision. He was chosen not by me, she replied, but by the convergence. Tesca's jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed, scanning Marcus like a puzzle that didn't belong, as if the very presence of this human disrupted equations thousands of years old. Your Majesty, he said with weight, prophecies are not invitations to gamble. Marcus didn't speak, not yet. But he felt it something shifting beneath the surface, not in the chamber, but in Shala. Her gaze faltered for the first time since he'd met her. Just for a second, subtle but real. Marcus turned to her. You were watching me, he said quietly. Before the jungle? She looked away. Not in shame, in hesitation. I had to be sure, she murmured, that the prophecy was about you. The chamber seemed to dim around them, like the walls were holding their breath. Marcus stepped closer, not angry, but searching. How long? He asked. Years, she whispered. Since your first assignment in the Congo Basin, since the blood test came back unusual. You followed me, he said, breath catching. This wasn't fate. You orchestrated it. Shala shook her head. Not orchestrated. Witnessed. She raised a hand, slowly, carefully, as if revealing something fragile. A holographic projection flickered to life between them. It wasn't a chart, not a prediction. It was a file, medical logs, expedition records, scans of Marcus's genome layered over images of something older. Symbols. Glyphs etched into temple stone from a ruin Marcus had excavated years ago. One pattern repeated itself in stone and in him. A spiral with a break, and a tiny bridge closing that gap. The missing piece. Your DNA wasn't created, Shala said. It was found, in you, as if the earth had been waiting to remember itself. And there, in that moment, Marcus understood. He hadn't wandered into this. He had always been part of it. A bond forged not in choice, or ritual but in forgotten code, passed down through time, waiting for someone to carry it forward. And he was the only one left. The last living descendant of a forgotten experiment, and the key to a future neither species could claim alone. The chamber dimmed as the ritual began, not with candles or chants, but with bioluminescent pulses, rising from the floor in slow, deliberate waves. The walls, once solid and silent, shimmered with living light, responding to a rhythm that didn't come from this world, but from within her. Marcus stood still, one hand extended, fingertips resting lightly against a curved panel of organic glass. On the other side, the womb interface glowed faint at first, then deeper, pulsing in time with a heart he couldn't see, but could feel. It wasn't beating like his. It was thinking. The air around him shifted, thickened, like a dream just before sleep takes hold. His vision blurred not from dizziness, but from something subtler, a pull. Synaptic, sensory, emotional. Then it happened. In a sudden flood of color and sensation, he was no longer in the chamber. He was inside her, inside the child. A soft warmth wrapped around his mind. Not words, not language, but awareness. A presence. Small, delicate, but vividly alive. Shapes swirled memories that hadn't happened yet. A jungle glowing with silver mist. Skies he didn't recognize. A heartbeat calling to his own, echoing across the dark. And Thenes. Golden, wide, curious, terrified. She already sees you, came a voice. It wasn't spoken aloud, it arrived, like a thought not his own. She's afraid you'll leave her, like the others. Marcus staggered backward, breath caught in his throat. The connection didn't break, it clung to him. That little soul, unformed but not unaware, reached for him with something deeper than fear. It was need. The kind only something truly alive could feel. This child, he whispered, still trembling. She's already conscious? A hand settled on his shoulder, calm, firm, Ixal. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable, voice low and steady. She's not just a hybrid, she said. She's evolution itself. Marcus turned toward the interface again. This time, he didn't see a specimen. He didn't see a creation. He saw a person. One that wasn't supposed to exist, and yet somehow, she did. She didn't ask for him with words. She didn't know how. But in that moment, through the pulse of shared thought and bioluminescent breath, she said something no mind had ever told him before. Don't leave. I'm not like them, I'm still becoming, but I'm already yours. And as he stood there, connected to something never meant to be born, Marcus understood the terrifying beauty of it all. This wasn't science, it wasn't destiny, it was the beginning of something ancient trying to live again through him. The alarms weren't blaring. They whispered a low, pulsing sound that throbbed through the stone like a heartbeat gone wrong. The bioluminescent veins along the walls flickered erratically, dimming as something foreign crept through them. The city wasn't just under attack, it was being poisoned from within. Marcus barely had time to react before the chamber sealed behind them. Shala was already moving, no hesitation, no word-sure body shifting, every motion sharp and instinctive, like a predator sensing blood in the air. Then he saw it, a rupture along the side of the gestation chamber. The protective membrane had been breached. Inside, the fluid was turning dark, spoiling, the embryo twitching in distress, as if it could feel the corruption seeping into its world. A shrill hiss echoed from the upper catwalk's movement in the shadows. Figures cloaked in scaled armor, eyes glowing with zealotry. Old blood, old fears, loyalists of the ancient order. They had come not to kill the queen but to erase what she dared to create. The air was thick with a metallic scentozone in decay. Bioagents, airborne, designed to unravel DNA strand by strand. Not a bomb. A message. Marcus grabbed a containment pod from the rack, but it wouldn't power on. The filtration system was compromised. The embryo had minutes. Shala cried out sharp. Rowan staggered. Her knees hit the floor, and her hand clutched her abdomen. Blood slipped between her fingers, but it wasn't red. It shimmered a translucent violet, threaded with gold, pulsing too fast. She's dying, Marcus. Her voice cracked as she looked up, eyes wide with something far beyond fear. They corrupted the chamber, she's losing cohesion. Marcus dropped beside her, arms catching her before she fell completely. Her skin was cold now, slick with sweat, but her eyes were still alive, still fighting. Then use me, he said, voice low, steady. Use my blood. Shala hesitated, her breathing shallow, the bond flickering between them like a failing signal. The rituality was forbidden, incomplete, unstable, never tested on a human host. But it was the only option. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the node behind her spine, unlocking the living interface embedded in her skin. The cord slithered forward, alive, reaching for him. This will hurt, she whispered. I don't care, he answered. The connection latched onto him just below the ribcage, and the pain came instantly. A searing, ripping sensation, not in his flesh, but in his cells. His blood surged through the thread, carried by something more ancient than machines. The air around them rippled. Time stretched. The embryoing only moments ago glowed again, slowly, weakly, then brighter. The biopod's liquid shimmered back to life, stabilizing as the fused code human and Sci-Fi began to overwrite the damage, repairing, reinforcing. Marcus felt the pull of strength pouring out of him, rewriting something fundamental in both of them. He wasn't just giving life. He was becoming part of it. And when it was over, when the cord withdrew, his knees gave out. He collapsed beside Shala, heart pounding against the stone floor. But the chamber no longer pulsed with sickness. The embryo floated still, alive and glowing. Shala looked at him, pale, breathless, but her voice came steady. She's stable. He didn't respond, he couldn't, but the look in his eyes said everything. For the first time, the child wasn't just theirs. She was them. They stood at the heart of the chamber, not surrounded by scientists, nor encased in technology, but alone, beneath the ancient root-vein ceiling that trembled with breath. The air was heavy, charged not with fear, but with something deeper, something primal. The chamber itself seemed to pause, watching. "No machines," Shala said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "No chambers, just us, pure will." Marcus nodded, unsure if he was responding to her words or to something greater whispering between their minds. They stepped closer, not as man and queen, but as vessels vulnerable, open, exposed. Her fingers brushed against his, and a pulse traveled through the space between them, soft, electric, a thread of thought, then another, until strands of sensation, memory, and instinct braided together like vines seeking the same sun. Their skin shimmered where it touched, gold veining into blue, blue folding into green, until the boundaries between them blurred. There was no pain, only surrender. Their thoughts entwined. He felt her doubts, her centuries of silence, her buried dreams wrapped in ritual and responsibility. She felt his wonder, his grief, his quiet terror of being seen completely. And neither recoiled. As they locked eyes, a wave of luminous energy surged outward, light born not of fire or current, but consent. The stone beneath them responded first, veins of bioluminescence flaring awake, then the walls, then the city. The entire subterranean realm pulsed to life. Dormant systems hummed with purpose. Ancient machines turned without commands. Reservoirs once stagnant began to flow again. The very breath of Xibalba returned, as if the city itself had waited for this for them. And then it happened. A sound broke through the silence. Not loud, not violent, but unmistakable. A cry. Faint, muffled, but alive. From within her womb, the child responded not in thought, not in image, but in voice. A trembling wail from the depths of her body, echoing against the high vaults like a secret breaking open. Marcus stepped back, stunned. "She," he whispered, barely able to speak. "She cried." Shala's eyes welled not with pain, but with something deeper. Reverence, the kind of emotion no language could frame. "She's awake," she said, voice shaking. "She knows." For the first time in remembered history, a hybrid child had crossed the threshold between hope and reality. Not in silence, not in theory, but in sound. And with it, a species long fading had heard the call of its future. Not from the throne, not from prophecy, but from the cry of a child yet unborn. The chamber was carved into the spine of the earth round, immense, older than memory itself. The ceiling arched high above them, like the ribs of some fossilized beast, its surface crawling with glowing runes that shimmered in rhythm with the breath of those within. The elders were already seated. 13 thrones. 13 pairs of ancient eyes, their scales dulled by centuries, their voices heavy with legacy. They did not speak first. They simply stared at Marcus, at Shayla, and most of all, at the child neither of them could yet hold. When the silence broke, it was like the sound of stone cracking beneath pressure. "The hybrid must not survive," one of them said, voice brittle but absolute. "Its existence threatens the genetic sanctity of our kind." Another joined, deeper, colder. "We do not fear change. We fear contamination. This child is not one of us. It is something else, something unclean." The words hung in the air like spores, deadly, invasive. Marcus rose slowly, his body sore from the ritual, but his voice clear. "You call yourselves advanced," he said, looking each of them in the eye, "yet you fear what's different." He took a breath, calm, centered, not defiant, but resolute. "She's not a threat. She's your only future. While you've debated, your kind has withered. While you've preserved bloodlines, you've lost generations. She's not the end of your species, he's the beginning of what comes next." Some of the elders stirred, but most remained still, stone, pretending to be flesh. Then Shala stepped forward. No crown, no armor, no authority draped across her shoulders, only truth. "If this council deems her unworthy, I renounce my claim to the throne," she said. "I will leave this city. I will raise the child beyond your walls. but I will not let you erase, usto protect a purity that has already failed you. Gasps rippled through the hall like wind through dry leaves. For a moment, no one moved. Then a voice rose not from the circle, but behind it. Teska. He stepped forward, his stride deliberate, eyes sharper than they had ever been. For centuries, I followed the code. I believed in its elegance, its logic, its promise, he said. But promises wither when left unchallenged. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the elders, then settling on Marcus. For the first time, I see a future I want to be part of. The silence that followed wasn't absence. It was awakening. One by one, the runes above them dimmed then brightened again, not in rejection, but in reconsideration. The chamber felt different, not warmer, not lighter, just less afraid. And somewhere, deep within the city's nervous system, the sensors tied to the embryo flickered. Heartbeat, strong, sustained, chosen not by decree, but by decision. The first crack came like a whisper barely audible, but every living surface in the chamber felt it. Then came the second, louder, sharper, followed by a low groan from the walls above. The bioshield failed. Without warning, the sky split open, and the rain fell not water, but liquid fire laced with acidic mist, descending from the atmosphere like punishment from a forgotten god. The cavern shuddered. The air hissed. Surfaces began to corrode in seconds. Metal wept. Stone blistered. Every failsafe collapsed. And in the center of it all, Shala collapsed to her knees. She cried out, her hands braced against the trembling floor, her body convulsing under the weight of something far stronger than pain. Her womb pulsed with unnatural light. The child was coming now, whether they were ready or not. There was no med team. No sterile cradle of technology. Just Marcus. A man soaked to the bone, shirt clinging to his skin, eyes wide, not with fear, but with absolute clarity. He knelt beside her, one hand cradling her trembling shoulder, the other gripping the only tool he had, a curved obsidian blade, ceremonial and far from clean. Hold on, Shala, he whispered more to himself than her. You'll see her, I promise. She didn't speak. She couldn't. Her jaw was clenched, eyes glassed with primal agony, yet locked onto his with unwavering faith. Lightning flared across the sky beyond the breached vault's brief, violent diviniand. For a moment, the entire city flickered with her contractions. Every living root, every chamber vein, every bioreactive node throbbed in sync with her. The child was not just hers. She was theirs. And she was ready. Marcus moved with shaking hands, guided not by science, but instinct. His own breath faltered as the glow from beneath Shala's abdomen intensified, rays of gold and sapphire breaking through stretched, semi-translucent flesh. The moment split like time itself, and then she emerged. Tiny, wet, breathing. Her skin shimmered, half-scaled, half-smooth, her form delicate yet coiled with something ancient, and her eyes bright gold, wide open, locked onto Marcus instantly. She didn't cry. She simply stared, as if recognizing him from a memory not her own. The rain kept falling, but it no longer touched them. Instead, it hit a barrier, spherical, shimmering, emanating from the infant herself. The acid hissed as it struck the glowing membrane, then evaporated harmlessly. Around them, a dome of bioluminescent light expanded outward, wrapping all three in warmth, shielding them from the world's fury. Shala exhaled, long and low. Her fingers reached toward the child, but stopped inches short, trembling with disbelief. She's real, she breathed. Marcus looked down at the girl in his arms, his voice hoarse, barely audible. She's more than that, she's the bridge. The rain slowed. The sky above dimmed. And the earth ancient, wounded, watching held its silence. Here, in the center of ruin and rebirth, lay something impossible. Not just survival, not just evolution, but the first life form born of both species, wrapped in light, not made by gods, but by choice. A child forged in fire, fear, and fate, now breathing between worlds. The storm passed, but she remained. And so, from a single scream in the jungle, a new future was born. Not forged in peace, not bound by war, but breathed into life by something older than science and far more dangerous than prophecy. She is the first of her kind. A child not of one species, but of two worlds. A living bridge between what was and what might be. And this is only the beginning. Because deep beneath the earth and high beyond the stars, there are others watching, waiting, choosing, and what Marcus and Shala have done may change everything. Stay with us. More truths are buried. More voices are calling. And the next story is already waking. Subscribe to Alien Chronicles. Because the galaxy, it remembers everything